I want to start out by saying that I'm a 25-year-old male, average but broad build, and I'm somewhat taller at 6'1", so not what you'd usually consider an easy target or victim. I'm an avid outdoorsman. I love being in the middle of the woods, either with friends or alone. There's a certain peace I find when I'm sitting alone by a stream with nothing but nature all around me. I specifically love hiking, and I usually start hiking in the spring. My favorite spot to hike locally is in a small town in southwest Ohio. This is normally a very peaceful, quiet, and relaxing place. Usually you'll run into a couple of other hikers or families swimming in the creek nearby, or just a few animals along your trail. This day, however, well, it turned out to be entirely different. It started off like every other hiking trip. I grabbed my pocket knife and water bottle and headed toward my spot. Once I arrived, I picked my favorite trail and started down the loop. It was a windy day in mid-spring, and I had been hiking for about half an hour when I then heard what sounded like a woman screaming for help in the distance. I paused momentarily at the bottom of a small incline, listening closely when I heard the scream yet again. At this time, I ran up the incline to see if there was someone injured nearby who maybe needed help. But when I reached the top of the small hill, my stomach wrenched, and I got the feeling that I should just go on about my business. So following my instincts, I did just that. After that, I stopped a ways up ahead and listened again. I hadn't heard the noise in a while, but I wanted to make sure that I didn't hear it again. The wind blew once more, and the noise came back as the trees swayed back and forth. I decided that the noise was from the trees, and just kept on my trail. As I tried to shake the eerie sick feeling in my stomach, I rounded a bend in the trail, and as I got to the clearing around the brush, I saw a man on his hands and knees on the ground with his face in the dirt. The man had a dog with him, and he was wearing a backpack. I figured that he had dropped something and was looking for it, so I just kept heading his way down the trail. As I drew closer, the man looked up at me and stood up from the ground. He was a larger guy, probably about 6'4" if I had to guess. Pretty stocky build. His face looked like that of a drug user. He blocked my path. I stopped about 10 feet from him, standing facing him, maintaining eye contact and distance. He had asked me if I ever smelled these flowers, as he pointed to them on the ground. I then said, "No, I haven't," as friendly as I could at the time. He then looked at me and said,
"Every spring, I have to get down on my hands and knees and smell these flowers. They're just nothing like you'll ever smell."
I kinda just gave a, that's cool. He paused for a few seconds, and I could tell he was sizing me up. After his pause, he said,
"Yeah, you should smell them sometime."
And he paused again, halfway motioning for me to get down and smell these flowers. "Fuck that," I said. "Yeah, maybe I will some other time." And he then gave me a look of subtle frustration, giving another long pause. I broke the silence by telling him that he has a really pretty dog.
"Yeah, she's a really good girl,"
he said. At which point then I decided I had enough of this interaction, and I said, "Alright, well, I'm gonna keep on my way then." The man paused again, and he just told me to take care, and then turned to keep going down the opposite direction of me. I started walking again, and after about 5 seconds, I peered over my shoulder just to make sure that he wasn't following me. But he was gone. He had completely vanished from the trail in just a couple of seconds. You'd think I would be kind of relieved to be away from him, but not knowing where he was really put me on high alert. I decided to try and enjoy the rest of my hike and went down this trail that I had always seen but never explored. The trail then went about a quarter mile through a field with trees on each side of the trail. Then at a sign with a map, split off into 3 mini trails that all led to backpacker campsites. As I went down the trail, I stopped for a second to use the bathroom and then check over my shoulder again. Nothing. I made it to the sign at the split, and my stomach wrenched again, telling me not to go down that trail anymore, to turn back. So I did. I turned back, and I started back down the trail to the main loop. I pulled my knife from my pocket and had it ready in my hand. I was about halfway back to the main loop when I then saw the man yet again in the distance. He had doubled back and was now walking straight towards me again. I've went over this in my head 100 times, and it just didn't logically make sense for him to turn around because it was only about a quarter of the way through his end of the loop. I was about 3/4 of my way through the loop since we were heading opposite directions. He walked toward me, a lump forming in my throat and my stomach still turning. As he passed me, he had a look of annoyance on his face. He then saw my hand with my knife in it and just said once more,
"Take care,"
and just kept walking past me with his dog. Luckily, that was my last encounter with him and the noises I heard. I'm pretty positive there was no woman at all. I don't really know if he was truly a person or some kind of creature imitating a person, but I don't really care. I think those screams were actually a lure that luckily I didn't fall for. As for the rest of my trip, I hurried quickly out of those woods that day. I do still hike there, and I do still go on that trail, but I now won't do it without my pistol on my hip. I think he planned to trick me into smelling the flowers so he could avoid a fight and then hit me while I was down. God only knows what he would have done. I think because I was armed and I followed my instincts is why I came out of those woods that day. Maybe it doesn't sound so bad in this retelling of my story, but I know what I felt that day. No matter what your gender or size is, you can be a victim if you let yourself be. Always follow your instincts, always be aware of your surroundings, and always be prepared to protect yourself, especially if you're alone in the woods.
My name is Jen. I'm in my 40s, and me and my friend run a business via Airbnb here in the UK. We own a few different properties across London, and while my friend acts as the financial backing, I run the day-to-day business of dealing with repairs and quest queries, as well as inspecting the rentals both before the guests arrive and after they check out. As you can imagine, summertime is our busiest period of the year, with business picking up a lot around Christmas too. But then we always have this really quiet period around the autumn where we struggle to break even, and it really puts a dent in our annual profits. So imagine our joy when last year we got a 3-week-long booking for one of our swankier properties in North London. It was a huge payday for us, even with the block discount that Airbnb mandates, and we tried to be as welcoming and accommodating as possible to increase the chance of repeat business. For those of you that have used Airbnb before, you'll know that the vast majority of rentals are completely non-contact, and that style of rental only increased over the course of the pandemic. That means that we didn't meet our renters even once, and throughout the whole of their 3-week stay, we didn't receive a single call from them. The only thing we knew is that one of the 2 guests was a girl named Alice. Alice paid the deposit, the rental fee, everything. So about halfway through the stay, I dropped Alice a text to ask if everything was going okay. The reply said nothing other than, fine, thanks, so we assumed their stay was going wonderfully. I certainly wasn't complaining that they were low-maintenance guests because, as much as I don't mind helping out where and when I'm needed, there's nothing worse than a guest who keeps calling you up every 5 minutes, asking where things are, claiming that things are broken when they're not. When their 3 weeks were over, I made my way over to the flat to make sure everything was in order. I wasn't expecting anything to be rough. Maybe a few towels left on the floor, maybe a full bin bag, the usual stuff that people leave behind when they're in a hurry to leave. We'd had someone really make a mess of one of the flats before after having an all-night party there, so I was always ready to be greeted by an absolute horror show. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found in that flat that day. I knew something was wrong almost immediately after trying to get into the flat, as there seemed to be something blocking the door from the other side. It took me a good few shoves to get in. Then I saw that someone had piled some chairs up against the door as a means of slowing down entry, but not completely barring access. I also noticed how cold it was, which was the first hint that I got that someone had left one of the windows open, something we specifically asked guests not to do since the area had something of a pigeon problem. I rather quickly deduced that whoever had tried to bar the door had done so, then used a window to actually leave the flat. By why ever in God's name they'd want to do that was a complete mystery to me. At least, for the next few minutes anyway. I walked into the living room to shut the window, and I could tell that it was the living room because of the cold breeze coming from it. And that's when I saw the mess they'd made. But unlike the mess the partiers leave behind, which tended to be loads of empty bottles and cans, cigarette butts, that sort of thing, the place looked like there had been some kind of fight. Loads of glasses and plates were smashed. The chairs were gone. The tables were overturned. It was a complete mess. The next place I checked was the bedroom, deciding to leave the bathroom till last because I was honestly dreading whatever had been left in there, and seeing the state the bedroom had been left in just made me dread it even more. There were all kinds of empty condom wrappers all over the bedroom, as well as all kinds of adult toys strewn around the room. The sheets had stains on them, and God knows what they'd come from, but the whole room just reeked of you-know-what. It was disgusting. Finally, I braced myself to check the bathroom to see what kind of mess had been left behind, expecting something god-awful that I'd probably have to spend the rest of the morning cleaning. But then, like I said, I could never have been ready for what was behind that door. I pushed open the bathroom door, took a peek inside, then immediately slammed it closed after seeing something lying in the bath. Something person-shaped. I say person-shaped because just from the split second I saw it, it didn't actually look like a person. Not a living one anyway. It was all lumpy and covered in gore, almost like it was just pieces of fresh meat butchered and piled on top of one another. I think I was just in denial about what I saw at first. I mean, I didn't want it to be what it was. So in those few moments, I tried to think of everything it could have been instead of what it actually was. I don't know what actually drove me to open the door again. I certainly didn't want to, if that makes any sense. I think I'd actually managed to convince myself that what I'd seen wasn't real, that I just assumed the worst after seeing the rest of the flat, and that it just wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Only, it was as bad as I thought it was. If anything, it was worse. It was a body, and it was just lying there in the bath in probably the worst condition you can possibly imagine. Partly the reason why I didn't recognize it as one immediately is because the girl's face was so beaten up that she didn't even look human anymore. There wasn't a single patch of skin that didn't have blood drying on it, but it wasn't that brown-looking blood that had clotted. It actually still looked kind of fresh, like it had only been there for a few hours at the most. I immediately pulled my phone out, dialing 999 to tell them that I needed the police as quickly as they could get there. The girl, who I assume was the girl who'd rented from us, was just laying there, perfectly still, and I couldn't hear her breathing or anything, so I just assumed that she was dead. I even told the bloke on the other end of the line that I was almost certain she was dead, and that's when he asked me to check her pulse to make sure. I did as he asked, 100% certain that I wouldn't feel a thing because in my mind, no one on earth could survive the kind of violence that she'd been put through. I don't even think I was touching the right spot on her neck at first, because again, I couldn't feel a thing, and after racking my brain for a minute, trying to remember the girl's name, I think I just blanked because of the panic. I just said, "Alice?" And then, she opened her eyes. Having that happen, like she'd properly come back from the dead or something, was the single most terrifying moment of my life. It was absolutely horrendous. They were all bloodshot too, and one of them had absolutely no white in the eye whatsoever. It was just a bright red mess of broken blood vessels. Then, as soon as she laid eyes on me, she started screaming and lashing out, terrifying me so much as I just ran out of the flat and into the corridor outside while shouting that she's alive, down the phone. I remember the guy on the other end of the phone telling me to go and unlock the front door to the flat building, since it was an old-style place with a door you could leave on the latch. After that, I had to run back upstairs to make sure the girl didn't let herself out of the flat, as she had obviously just launched into fight or flight mode after waking up and thinking that she was still in danger. When I got upstairs, the girl was half naked, just slouched in the hallway outside the flat, and she was crying her eyes out. I told her to stay put and that the ambulance was on the way. Then all she did was cry those choked sobs while her tears cleared the blood from her face. And that's another image I'll never get out of my head. How her tears actually seemed to clean the blood from the parts of her deformed face they'd touched. When the paramedics arrived, I found out that the only reason she hadn't actually run off after waking up screaming was because she literally couldn't. I don't know what kind of damage had been done to her legs, but the paramedics had to bring in a stretcher up to the hallway to actually get her down into the ambulance. After she was taken to the hospital, a second set of policemen, the first went with her to the hospital, asked me to stay out of the flat on behalf of a forensics team which were on their way down. Then they proceeded to ask me a load of questions regarding exactly what I'd seen and what I knew about the people renting. Obviously, I knew next to nothing other than her name and the amount of time that she'd been staying for, but I answered their questions as best they could. They also promised to keep me in the loop regarding certain details of the investigation, so I could pass on the details to our insurance company for the eventual claim we were going to file with them. About a week or so later, I got a call from an officer, and while he didn't tell me exactly what had happened, he told me everything he was permitted to tell me. Basically, the two girls who rented the flat were call girls who'd come down from the north to use the place as a kind of base of operations for 3 weeks because they could basically charge more for their services in London than they could up north. At least, that was their logic. Apparently, their little idea had worked really well, and they'd had a profitable, relatively trouble-free few weeks. But then, on the night before they'd been due to check out, some local gangsters had gotten wind of their little operation and didn't take kindly to them operating in their area. Apparently, these girls were charging quite a bit of money, but it was still lower than the rate that these gangsters had agreed upon for all their girls. So, they hatched a little plan. They would raid the flat the girls were staying in, scare them enough that they'd leave the area, and take any money they'd made in the process. But the thing was, the girls didn't keep much money in the flat with them, and were taking the cash to a friend of theirs who just so happened to live in London too. That's how only one girl ended up getting left in the bath. She ended up being the only one they beat the crap out of and torturing as a means of scaring the other girl, who they forced out of the window before making her lead them to where they'd stashed all their money. And that was all I was told. And as much as the officer hinted that they got a few blokes in custody, he obviously couldn't tell me who they were or who they were affiliated with. And that's all the info I got too, as the police didn't get back in touch aside to tell us that we were free to use the apartment again, and I was more focused on the insurance claim than anything else after that. That was the single worst incident in the history of our little Airbnb business, and probably one of the worst things I'd ever come across in my entire life.
I am a pizza delivery driver. This was by far the scariest thing to happen to me. It took place about 1 year ago. I was working on a Thursday night, which were usually decently busy. I made quite a few deliveries, and the later it got, the more things calmed down. At about 1 in the morning, I got a delivery for a cheese pizza. I put it into my car and drove to the location, which was about 10 minutes away. It was in an area of town which I rarely delivered to and was a little more run down. I got to the address, which was a 2-story house with a pretty decent-sized yard and many overgrown plants and trees. It looked a little bit run down like most houses in the area and had a front porch that seemed to wrap around the house. I got out of my car, grabbed the pizza, and walked up the driveway to the house. Then I walked up the steps to the door and rang the doorbell. About 30 seconds went by, and I was about to ring the bell again when the door started to open. A man answered. He was fairly large and bald and looked to be in his 50s. He just stood there staring at me for a second. I said I had his pizza and handed it to him. He looked almost surprised and said, "Oh, okay, that's nice." Then he just looked around. He just seemed a little bit strange to me. Then he said to me that he had to get some cash to tip me and he would be right back. He went back inside and closed the door. I stood there waiting for a good 2 or 3 minutes, but the man still didn't return. I was thinking about just leaving when I heard some noise and figured the man must be coming back. But when I listened closer, it wasn't coming from inside. It was coming from outside on the porch. I looked around to the direction of the noise.
I work at a regional grocery store. I'm a 26-year-old female. I graduated from college with a master's degree in psychology and still couldn't find a job. Due to family circumstances, I wasn't able to get my PhD, which was basically the bare minimum to land any decent paying job. So, I was a little stuck. I even had a hard time finding a regular job. I had applied to a bunch of lower positions, but I kept getting rejected because I was overqualified. Over and over again, people told me that I would get too bored on the job, and so they wouldn't hire me. This made me livid. After a certain point, my student loan payments were due and I really needed the money. I had to ask my cousin's friend for a job. He was the manager at this regional grocery store. Literally the only position they had available was stocking shelves on night shift. I couldn't believe myself. I was so ashamed. I felt like I'd wasted years of my life and thousands of dollars in debt just to get a job anyone could do. But either way, the job itself wasn't all that bad. I was allowed to listen to my earbuds while I worked. This meant I could turn on my favorite podcast while working. My favorite murder, if you're wondering. I must have worked there for about a year before the big change came. Previously, the store closed down at 12 in the morning, but for whatever reason, that policy got changed and it became a 24-hour store with the exception of holidays and Sunday nights. It really sucked. What used to be my podcast and stock the shelves time kept getting interrupted by stupid customers asking where things were. That was fine. I didn't mind helping people out. I worked there after all. But they would literally ask me where the most obvious grocery items were. So many times I couldn't help but think, are you literally blind or stupid? But then there was one night when a very strange man came up to me. He had really buggish eyes. Entire body was round and he had the longest nose hair I'd ever seen on a human being. It was like he took the hair right off of his head and glued it into his nose. I was down on my knees stocking the bottom shelf with pickles when he touched my hair. I had my hair in a ponytail that night and he lightly caressed the part of it that was touching my back. I jerked back and asked him, "Excuse me?" He tried playing it off like he had arthritis, but I knew that he was just being a creep. I asked him what he wanted. He stood there for a second. He seemed to be thinking of what to say, but only one word came out of his mouth. "You." He walked up closer to me and then started to smell my shoulder. It felt so weird and I don't think I could have been more creeped out. I told him that if he doesn't need any help finding any items, then I had work I had to be doing. But he kept standing there. He started smiling real wide and then hugged me. "It's okay, darling. I'm going to take care of you." At this point, I was screaming inside of my own head. This freak was crossing a million different lines. I pushed him off of me and ran to get my manager, who was a larger guy. He'd have no problem fighting this creep if it came to it. The creepy guy followed me as I went too. The nerve on this guy. When he saw my manager down the aisle, he must have had second thoughts because he turned around and started running away. I explained to my manager everything that had happened, and he said he'd take care of it if that guy came back again. And that creep was smart, because he waited a couple of weeks before he did come back. He waited long enough that the incident would not be on the tip of anyone's mind. I wasn't expecting him, and neither was my manager. I was standing there, stocking a shelf like I always did, and all of a sudden I felt someone tugging my hair. They tugged really hard, and it really hurt my neck. They totally overpowered me and started dragging me across the floor. At this point, I hadn't even realized who it was until I looked up to see that man. He must have dragged me a solid 30 feet to the exit before someone saw what was going on. It wasn't my manager, but it was another one of the girls who worked with me. She started screaming like a banshee and running at him. and for one reason or another, he decided to run away again. I was beyond relieved. I couldn't believe that he was just going to walk up to me and start dragging me out of the store by my hair. What kind of psycho does that? It was all just truly horrifying. This was finally the incident that convinced the store owner that we had to have security if we were going to be open at night. We had a security guard somewhere on the premises after that, and I felt a lot safer. I'm still looking for a job in psychology, and I really hope I can get one soon. I felt like I really needed a break after having gone through all of this.
A couple of years ago, I traveled to a city for a prospective job. I had a potential job offer and was going to stay a total of 2 days to look at the area in case I were to move there. I didn't really spend a whole lot of time looking for where to stay. I kinda just went onto the Airbnb app, found a place that looked good, and then went for it. I do remember though that the owner seemed like a really nice guy. When I arrived, the place itself was decent. It was a little place right by the city. I got the keys and got inside to drop off my stuff. After that, I went out for a few hours and then returned that night. I went to bed that night pretty early. I've always been kind of an early bird and I'm used to it. However, I woke up in seemingly the middle of the night, which is unusual. When I woke up, I looked around confused after seeing it was still dark outside and clearly nighttime. I looked at the clock to see that it was 2:30 a.m. and I remember, just as I was looking at the clock, I heard the sound of the front door to the house being opened. The house had been completely silent, and hearing that was a scary moment. I knew nobody else was supposed to be in the house. I'm not really sure what I was thinking. Maybe it was because I had just woken up and wasn't thinking clearly, but I grabbed the blankets and covered myself with them like a little kid. I then heard footsteps starting to come closer to the bedroom that I was in. My heart started to race like crazy, and I was terrified. I sort of came to my senses and knew that hiding under the covers was a bad idea, but what could I do? I had no time to prepare for this. As the footsteps got closer, it was clear to me that they would likely come in the bedroom. The only thing I thought to do was pretend to still be asleep. Maybe, just maybe, if somebody was going to rob the house or something like that, if they saw that I was fast asleep, they would just ignore me. I also felt this was my only option, because I had no time to run to the closet and hide, or grab something to use as a weapon. I didn't even have time to dial 911, as my phone was charging on the desk, not within my reach. Once whoever was there reached the door, I heard it open, and I closed my eyes and pretended to be sound asleep. I heard whoever was there take 2 steps inside the room or so, and then they just stopped. I didn't hear any more noises or movement for about a whole minute. Very carefully, I opened my eyes just a crack. I was careful to make it look like they were still closed, but I wanted to see whoever was in there. As soon as my eyes cracked open, I saw somebody standing right in front of the doorway, facing me. I looked at them for a couple of seconds. Then I recognized them. It was the man who owned the Airbnb. I remembered him from his picture. He was just standing there staring at me, with no expression on his face. I was careful to close my eyes without making it look like they had ever been open. I was terrified and also very confused as to what he was doing here. He stayed there for probably 5 more minutes and didn't move. It felt like forever, and I was just waiting for him to do something. Finally, I heard him turn around and then walk away. I laid in bed listening carefully to wherever the man moved throughout the house. He went straight for the door and then just left. After that, I stayed up for about 2 more hours before I could get back to sleep. Luckily, the guy never returned. The next day, I contacted the owner of the Airbnb and asked him what he was doing in the house during the night. He denied being there completely. I reported him after that and did not return back. That was the last time I used Airbnb. This story happened a few years ago. I would often go to Starbucks to get work done on my laptop. It was my favorite place to work because I liked their coffee, and I didn't have the distractions I would have at home, so I could get a lot more work done. One day in the winter, I was working like I often did. It was nighttime, probably about 7:30 or so. The Starbucks I liked to go to closed at 8:30, so it was pretty calm and not really anybody else was there other than me at the time. I sat in my favorite spot, which was in the back corner of the table with this one soft chair that they had. I had to go to the bathroom, so I got up and walked over to it, which was only about 10 feet away from where I sat. I was in the bathroom for maybe a minute or two, and then came back out and returned to my laptop. I went back to work until I realized something. There was a portable USB stick that was in my computer. I knew it wasn't mine, and it hadn't been there before. I took it out and looked around the coffee shop. There was nobody else in there besides me. I got up and walked around, and then went to the counter and brought the USB with me. I asked someone working there if they had seen anyone go to my computer and handed them the USB drive. I was told they hadn't seen anyone, but they took the USB to hold on to. I looked from the counter and could see that the area I had been sitting in was obscured from the vision of whoever was working it. I went back and got my laptop and then left. I was hoping that whatever that was a joke, and they didn't mess up my computer in any way. When I got home, I looked on my computer again, and noticed that there was a new folder on the bottom left side of my screen. It was titled with just a bunch of numbers, and I clicked on it to see a text document. When I opened it up, a message read, "Hello, I know everything about you, where you live, who you are, and what you're doing." It really creeped me out, and I closed and deleted the file. Could this be true? Did the USB stick on my computer somehow reveal all of my information? I was terrified. As I was on my computer, suddenly something popped up on my screen. It was a video of myself on my webcam in a window. I tried to close the window, but I couldn't. No matter how many times I clicked or what I did, it just stayed there on my screen. It was the creepiest thing ever, so I slammed my laptop shut. I didn't use it again for a long time after that, and ended up taking it to a professional to have it cleared and reset. Looking back at that experience, I don't know exactly what happened, but I'm afraid whoever did that to me knew where I lived.
It was spring break of 2007, and I was home from college during what felt like the worst semester of my life. Classes were extra hard for me that year, and not to mention, I had just gone through my first major breakup, and as a 19-year-old, I was still learning how to deal with that. So spring break was just what I needed. And to make things even better, my family had a timeshare on a cabin that was located in the woods just past Oneonta in upstate New York. I knew that I needed a break from the pressure of the real world and needed to find some peace of mind. So I asked my parents if I could spend a few days in the cabin if it was available. And to my luck, it was. And to my surprise, my parents were totally fine with it. We planned it out meticulously so that they wouldn't be worried about me. I was going to stay from Monday through Thursday, so I would need 4 days worth of food and water just in case the plumbing from the well wasn't working. After gathering all my supplies and packing my clothes, I hopped into my Subaru Outback and made my way to the cabin. It was about a 4-hour drive, but I just jammed out to some "A Day to Remember," and the time flew by. In no time at all, I was at the cabin, and I began to bring my things inside. I checked the sink, and the plumbing seemed to be working fine. After getting settled in, I made my way around the property and just enjoyed taking in all the sights. To be honest, the first few days were just pure bliss. I couldn't think of anything I would have rather been doing. Nothing compared to the scenery of the hikes that I went on, or the 2 fires that I had outside the first 2 nights I was there. It was great. I just listened to some music and let my mind wander. It wasn't until the 3rd day that things began to get a little strange. It was Wednesday, and I decided to go on one last hike before calling it a day. I walked down to my usual trail, which led to a small stream that I liked to take a break at and watch for a bit before heading back. And at first, everything was fine. However, on the walk back, I couldn't help but feel like I had 1,000 sets of eyes on me, like every movement I made was being watched. I tried to shake the feeling off, but it wouldn't go away. By the time I made it back to the cabin, the hair on my arms were standing straight up. I don't know what it was, but there was something wrong. Looking back on it, I wish I just decided to pack up and leave right then and there, but I decided to stay that last night. So I went inside the cabin and locked the door and proceeded to make sure the 2 windows were shut tightly as well. After a bit, I had managed to calm down and was about to fall asleep. That was when I heard it. It sounded like breathing coming from the other side of the cabin door, which was next to the couch that I had been laying on. I froze. I couldn't catch my breath as I tried to listen for more breathing noises. But what I was met with was far worse. A quick, scratching noise began to come from the other side of the door, as if something was trying to dig its way through. Then it stopped. I waited for a moment, as still as I could be, and that's when I heard it again, only this time it was to the right of the door, directly in front of where I was facing. It was as if it knew right where I was positioned. The scratching persisted for about 30 minutes, though it felt like hours. I didn't get any sleep that night, and as soon as the sun was up, I grabbed everything that I brought with me and bolted to my car. As I was sitting in the driver's seat, I was horrified at the sight of deep claw marks in the lower part of the cabin. An animal was definitely trying to get in that night, and I never went back to that cabin again.
This happened during summer when I was 7. I'm an 18-year-old female now. My mother was always working, so I was often left with my grandmother. She would always take me to eat, and after, if I was good, she would take me to the park. I usually got to pick where we ate, so I chose McDonald's. I was sitting down eating my Happy Meal, and my grandma got up to use the bathroom. As soon as she left, a man in his late 20s or early 30s sat down next to me and asked me if I wanted to come play a game. I, being the 7-year-old I was, said yes. He said it was a special game and that I couldn't tell anybody. At this point, my grandma was returning from the bathroom and started yelling at the man to get the hell away from me. He ran out the door, and I got in trouble for talking to strangers. We still ended up going to the park where I saw the man again. I was on the monkey bars and he asked me if I still wanted to play. Now I was starting to get a bit creeped out. I told him I wasn't supposed to talk to strangers and that my grandma was waiting for me. He said that if I won the game, I would get a present. I asked him where the present was, and he said it was in his car and that I should go with him to get it. I said no and started to run. He grabbed me and I started screaming. My grandma heard me and came running. She saw the man and got out her mace. He let me go, and my grandma sprayed him in the eyes until he was screaming. She called the cops on him, and he was arrested on the spot. We later found out he was a registered sex offender and a child molester. I am 14 years old and I live in Salt Lake City, just for a little background. And no, I am not a Mormon. Not that I have anything against Mormons or anything, I'm just saying. Anyways, the story goes like this. One day when my sister and I were young kids, about 10 years ago, we went to eat at McDonald's. As most kids do when they go to McDonald's, we love to play in the playland. So as we would always do, we played in the playland with my dad watching over us. After a while, my dad noticed a man in the playland taking pictures on his phone. It was a grown man, who I believe was somewhere in his late 20s. My dad was creeped out by this, so he confronted the man. My dad asked why he was in there, and the man replied by saying he was with his daughter in the playland. My dad told him to get out, as he was a grown man. The man then refused. The two of them got into an argument. My dad eventually punched up on the playland where the man was sitting, and made the man jump up and slam his head. He then came out of the playland yelling at my dad. He then proceeded to leave the McDonald's with no daughter of his own in sight. This may not have been the scariest thing ever, but it's scary to think what the man's intentions were. It scares me to think that he might have taken photos of me or my sister. When my dad told me this story, I just laughed my ass off because of how my dad made this guy slam his head. But after some deep thought, I'm thoroughly creeped out. This happened about a year ago in my first semester of college. I went to an art school in New York City, and my suite mates and I had a craving for fast food at around 12:30 a.m. We decided on the McDonald's down the street because we're classy as fuck. It was me, my suite mate Kat, and her boyfriend Tom. We ordered our food. Kat and I decided to split a shit ton of chicken McNuggets and pick a table by the door. Tom and Kat are sitting next to each other, holding hands as couples do, and I'm sitting there being the awkward third wheel and gorging myself on nuggets. In walks a slightly disheveled gentleman who starts to wander aimlessly in the direction of the register. We think nothing of him. I watch as he goes to order his food and turn back to my friends to chat. Suddenly, Kat mutters, "Anna, behind you." So I turn around, and there's the slightly disheveled gentleman again. This time, he's holding a flashlight. I turn back around to Kat and shrug, figuring it's just some harmless weirdo. I feel a tap on my shoulder to turn. I turn around again, and the guy asks, "The light isn't working in the men's room. Can one of you hold this flashlight while I use the toilet?" Seriously? Kat, being the nicest and most outgoing person of the group, responds first. Maybe you tell an employee that the lights don't work. I bet they could figure it out for you." "It'll only be a minute," the guy mutters and holds the flashlight out to us. "Could one of you just hold this while I pee?" He insisted. Tom answered next as I was determined to ignore the man. "No, just go ask an employee to fix the lights." "But I'll only be—" The man began again, but I interrupted him with a firm, "Fuck off." It was a weird situation made only weirder when, as we were leaving, Kat said, "He never went to the bathroom in the first place. How would he know the lights didn't work?" When I was about 6 or 7, I used to take swimming lessons in a local pool after finishing school twice a week on Wednesday and Fridays. On Fridays, Mum would take me into McDonald's to get a milkshake as a treat afterwards. I'd sit and drink my shake, then we'd head home, no problems. This day was different. I'd finished my shake and wanted the toilet before we left. So in I went, into the ladies on my own as I usually did. I noticed one cubicle was locked and thought nothing of it. Went in the second, did my thing, flushed and noticed that the person in the other cubicle was unlocking the door too. I hadn't heard them flush. I turned around, and it was a man. Old, disgusting, and tall. Why was he there? I innocently said, "This is for ladies only, mister." And he said, "Why do you think I'm in here, little girl? It's music to my ears. Where is your mummy?" He took a few strands of my hair and twirled them between his grim fingers and reached a hand to grab me by the shoulder. I shook out of his grip and ran as fast as I could back to my mum, crying. I told her what happened. She told an attendant, but by the time they checked, he'd managed to slip out unnoticed and into the busy street. I hope he never managed to get his hands on any little girls ever again.
I'm an 18-year-old female, and this happened to me just last week while working. For context, I work for a widely popular pizza chain around the country as a delivery driver. I won't name the place or location. I mean, I'm not getting paid for advertisement. Anyway, the restaurant was busy all day every day, which meant that I'd be doing deliveries left and right. Business wouldn't start to slow down until at least an hour before closing, so it was hectic to say the least. One night, my boss had called me in on my day off, asking if I was able to work that night as someone had called out. After all, I wasn't really doing anything that night, so I said why not and drove over to work. The second I get there, I clock in, and it was then when our phone rang with a man's voice requesting a large pie. However, the second he knew I was a female, the tone in his voice completely changed. In a sort of flirtatious manner, he had given me the address and how he wanted the pizza delivered. I told my coworker that I needed one regular and to hand it to me when ready. It was then when I noticed the order barely met our delivery radius, and I even asked my boss if it was still worth doing. I could tell he was in sort of a rush and didn't have time for questions or concerns, so I decided to do it. I put in the guy's address and went on my way to do what I hoped was my last delivery. It wasn't too far out, but it was then when I realized that the area I was in wasn't the best in town. It was one of those areas with run-down homes and unkept lawns where you'd commonly hear sirens every now and then. And being a small, petite college student, it was concerning being around here as crime here was at its highest. It was sketchy, but knew I could finally go home once I completed the delivery. I pull up to the townhouse my GPS led me to and immediately see that there were no cars in the driveway. However, there was a single light on, meaning there was indeed someone home. For those of you who don't know what a townhouse is, it's basically several homes fused together into one. Anyway, I step out of the car with the pizza in hand and knocked on the door as there was no doorbell. Within a minute, the door opens and I was greeted to a man who appeared to be in his mid-20s wearing, out of all clothes, a tuxedo. He was tall and his hair was a mess and honestly looked disheveled. The smell of strong alcohol could be noticed from his clothes, which wasn't attractive at all. He greeted me, introducing himself as Nate, and immediately grabbed the pizza from my hands. He opens it and looks back at me with a smile and says, "You know, I wouldn't be able to eat this pizza by myself. Would you mind coming inside to share?" I uncomfortably laugh and politely decline, telling him I had to go home and that I had to watch the carbs. However, he then insists, telling me how he was this great guy and how he could buy me all these nice things. This time in a more direct tone, I tell him no thank you, but that he was very thoughtful and to have a nice night. Suddenly, he then stops me, telling me he forgot to give me my tip. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $5 bill and handed it to me, making sure our hands touched. Now, this is the part where things really took a turn for the worst. As I was about to turn around and leave to go home, I hear clear as day this loud and blood-curdling scream from upstairs. He looks up at the pitch-dark hallway of his house and then back at me. It was then where his demeanor completely changed. This time, in a more serious tone of voice, he had said, I think it's time for you to go." I felt my blood run cold as he said this and ran back to the car, pulling out of his driveway, not looking back. As I'm in the car, I'm calling my boss, who is still at the restaurant, practically crying to him about the situation. He had said to come right back and that he was calling the police. When I arrived, police were already outside waiting with my boss. For a good while, I was questioned and gave them the address I made the delivery to. It's safe to say I didn't hear anything from police for a good week until I finally got a call back. Turns out, the man who I had made the delivery to had actually owned the house with his parents. The woman screaming was his now ex-girlfriend, who he had caught cheating with another man. The part that disturbed me the most was that he had beat her numerous times after he found out. She had been in his house for days and wouldn't let her leave until she, quote, learned a lesson. He was obviously arrested, and his ex was taken to a hospital where she thankfully did survive. The next day, I quit my job and now work as a desk representative. If there's one thing I've learned from this, is that always trust your gut when something feels off.
I used to work at a Starbucks here in Cardiff, and I've got to be honest, it's one of the better jobs I've ever had. The manager was brilliant, the other staff were nice and looked out for each other, so for a minimum-ish wage job, it was about as good as it gets. The only bad shifts to work were the first halves of Monday and Tuesday mornings, as the pre-work rush meant people were often at their absolute worst. I mean, don't get me wrong, people could be complete jerks at other times of the day or week, but the highest concentration of them was Monday and Tuesday mornings, without a shadow of a doubt. But rude customers aren't scary. Annoying and frustrating, yes. Chillingly cruel and calculating, not as much. Which is why this particular incident has stayed with me for so long, and I always seem to use it as my personal point of reference for how terrible human beings can be to each other. So, it's a Monday morning, and we're just coming to the end of the rush at around 9 a.m. 30 minutes more and the caffeine fiends will start to thin out, and we can get some coffee and make a smoke break of our own. I heard her before I saw her. Like, she was only just trying to get a handle on what had been pure harpy screeches just moments before. Some woman was on her phone, ranting away and not looking where she was going as she tries to find the back of the queue. In doing so, she cuts off this other bloke who politely informs her that she's queue jumping. I don't know if she actually didn't hear him or was just tactically ignoring him, but either way, this bloke has to tap her on the shoulder before saying, "Excuse me, believe I was ahead of you." The woman just shrugs this off at first, giving the guy a gesture like, "I'm too busy to listen to you." I remember the look of anger on the guy's face as she gently but firmly grabs the strap of her handbag and tugs her out of the queue before taking her place. I'm a bit torn about the whole thing. Like, yeah, it was righteous, but laying hands on someone, I feel like there could have been a better way to resolve the issue. But it wasn't like the guy had picked her up and thrown her, and due to the size difference, that was definitely a possibility. Anyway, she reacts like this had been the case, like him actually standing up to her was some horrific incident of assault, and starts demanding someone call the police, even though she herself was on the phone and simply refused to hang up. A couple of staff members and customers managed to calm the situation down, and we get the guy his coffee before one of my colleagues serves the angry woman. I didn't serve her, but when she got her order, she turns to be like, excuse me, this coffee isn't as hot as I asked for." No, I know better than to just argue with customers, and especially absolute whoppers like her. So I do as I'm asked and heat the coffee up a little bit more for her. I hand it back. She dips a finger in it and once again tells me, "This coffee isn't hot enough." Now, bearing in mind, she just watched me run some steam through it, but again, I do as I'm asked and give her back some literally steaming hot coffee that she proceeds to absolutely overload with sugar. No wonder she was in such a stinking mood. Her entire life was probably one big sugar crash, hence why she was such an unbearable person to be around. But little did I realize, that coffee wasn't for her, and on her way out of the store, she took the lid off of her scalding hot syrupy coffee and threw it in the guy's face as he sat reading his newspaper. God, the sound of that guy screaming was absolutely horrific. Like I didn't actually see the woman throw her coffee in the guy's face, so I thought someone had broken a leg or something. That's the only time I've heard someone scream in pain like that. When my old skating buddy absolutely shattered his leg on this visit to a Bristol skate park one year. But what followed in the coffee shop was pure chaos. People were pouring bottles of water onto this guy's face, ambulance staff and police turning up. I think the woman legged it as soon as she threw the coffee because, to my knowledge, no one was arrested. But the guy who had the coffee thrown on him suffered life-changing injuries. From what another colleague told me, the gross amount of sugar in the coffee meant that some of it actually stuck to his face like a kind of molten hot glue. He'd been left with terrible scarring for the rest of his life, and all because he stood up to some absolute monster in the queue that morning. That's what I find really scary, that some people out there are so unhinged that a seemingly normal interaction with them could end up with you suffering injuries you'll carry with you for the rest of your life. Just one moment of misjudgment, one little enough is enough moment, and boom, you're going to look at a very different version of yourself in the mirror for the rest of your natural life.
The story takes place at a small hotel where I worked at. My coworker had just finished up her 8 hours and I was due to leave pretty soon. It was 10 p.m. on a weekday, so the only people working there were me and the dining lady, who also cleans and does a few other odd jobs around the hotel. We were at low occupancy, so it was dead quiet. The lobby and the sitting area were really empty. Really, my only comfort was the TV. It was an easy night, so at least I had that going for me. Then I get a call. The caller ID didn't display a 9-digit number like it usually does, but instead, it's the last 4 digits of the hotel's phone number, which does tend to happen if someone's calling from one of the phones in the hallway. Also, guest calls almost always come through the front desk phone designated for rooms, but at times they end up being directed to the superset phones, and so the caller ID will show the last 4 digits of the hotel phone number. So it wasn't out of the ordinary, just rare. So anyways, there I am enjoying the quietness, Googling random shit to pass the time, and I pick up the phone and this guy answers. He sounds like he's in his 30s, maybe early 40s. He sounds really happy. He asks me how I was doing that night, which was really refreshing for a change. I engage, even though I honestly really wasn't in the mood. He laughs and jokes around before then asking if anyone's made a noise complaint. Not to my knowledge, I tell him, wondering in the back of my mind if I had heard anything that night. So it continues rather slowly because he's chuckling behind his words. I begin to hear someone else, a woman, in the background. So I think that's cute. This guy sounds like he's having a blast with his wife or something like that. They're probably in there getting turned as hell. Then he says,
"Well, I was just calling to make sure because, you see, my mother-in-law is here with me and she can't stop laughing."
I begin to laugh a little. How nice was it for him to call out of the concern for the other guests? I hear her as he's speaking. She's a little loud, but not enough for it to penetrate the walls or anything. I tell him it's totally fine. No big deal, honestly. I expect him to say something out of relief and hang up, but he just continues. I don't remember exactly what he said, but much of it was just him reiterating,
"It's just that she's laughing so much and won't stop."
I try to be as nice and understanding as I can and just insist that it's fine once again. Then he asks me,
"Do you know why she's laughing?"
He wants to have a conversation now. I honestly couldn't care less why his mother-in-law was laughing, but I'm a front desk agent. We do more than check people in and out. Sometimes we have to entertain. So I ask, why? Why is she laughing? And then he starts laughing. He can't spit out his words fast enough because he's freaking laughing, and I hear her too, and I'm getting annoyed and slightly uncomfortable now. I wait another few seconds before he says it.
"Because I'm tickling her feet. That's why."
Looking back now, I think to myself, why didn't I just hang up on the phone right then and there? There weren't words that I could use to respond to this guy, because who the hell would, right? I was already hungry and tired. Now I was hungry, tired, confused, and mildly offended. And like an idiot, instead of shutting him down, I just laughed and said, okay? And the guy goes,
"Yeah, I'm tickling my mother-in-law's feet and she loves it. She can't stop laughing."
For some reason, I just couldn't control the nervous spurts of laughter that were coming out of my mouth. I'm listening to this woman in the background who sounds like a broken record at this point. She's laughing uncontrollably while I'm crying internally.
"Oh yeah,"
he says.
"She really loves it, and I like it too."
He sort of stopped laughing at this point, and his voice then took on a really serious tone. And can you guess? I still didn't hang up the damn phone. I think at that point I was just zoning out. The dude just continues to talk about how much he's enjoying this. Good for you, I tell him, and I try to cut it off right there.
Do you like your feet tickled?
He asked me.
Tickling my mother-in-law's feet makes me a little horny. I wish it was my wife, but she's not here right now.
And that's where I kind of blinked and realized that this guy didn't call because he was concerned about a noise complaint. He's rambling on about his mother-in-law's feet while I'm at the front desk simultaneously helping other guests, and I can't put down the phone because I just can't believe I'm in this situation. Then I get the thought in the back of my mind that the mother-in-law's laughing just a bit too much. She hadn't said anything throughout the entire phone call like stop it or quit it. Her laughs were all the same, like they were on a freaking loop or something. Someone came to check in and I had to tell Feet Creep that I had to go. He sort of hesitated for a bit, like he wanted me to stay and talk a bit longer. His voice trailed off and I still heard the lady laughing in the background. I took that as my cue to hang up. I closed the blinds in the lobby and kept my ass behind the desk unless my help was desperately needed elsewhere. The dude talking about him tickling his mother-in-law's feet wasn't the thing that really scared me. It was more of the fact that the Feet Creep's call came through the superset phone without his last name and room number displayed on the caller ID. So I didn't know who was calling or if they were even in-house. That, and because I'm pretty sure that the woman in the background was definitely a recording. It was really creepy.